Greetings! Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Christopher Rice, and our guest today is Dr. Takyiwaa Manuh. Dr. Manuh is Professor Emerita of African Studies at the University of Ghana. Previously, she served as the Director of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana, in addition to Director at the Social Development Policy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Ethiopia. She received her PhD in Anthropology from Indiana University and holds degrees in law from the University of Ghana and the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Dr. Manuh is widely published in the fields of African development, women's rights and empowerment, modern migration in Africa, and African higher education systems. She has experience practicing as a lawyer, is active in the women's movement in Ghana, and received an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Sussex in the UK in 2015. Today, Dr. Manuh will share her insights on the importance of women's empowerment in Africa, her own lifelong activism, and the women's movement in Ghana. Takyiwaa, thank you so much for coming and speak with us.
Thank you. It's so good to be back here in Indiana.
To start out, can you talk to us about what it's like today to be a woman in Sub-Saharan Africa, particularly Ghana? How much progress has the country made relative to other African countries?
That's a rather tall order. So anyway, thank you. What is it like to be a woman in Sub-Saharan Africa today? I guess it depends on who you ask and where they live. As you know, Africa is made up of 55 countries. The countries are at varied stages in their development. There are countries in conflict. There are countries that have come out of conflict recently. And then there are other countries that are experiencing vast changes. You know, just last week, Ethiopia, which is going through a lot of reform at the moment, announced a cabinet made up of 50% women.
Very nice.
So if you're a woman in Ethiopia, you must feel like, you know, you're being recognized right now. On the other hand, if you live in the Central African Republic or the Democratic Republic of the Congo or in South Sudan, it's a very different story because of continued conflict and the problems that this creates for the population at large, and particularly for women and children. In my own country, Ghana, which has experienced relatively peace and stability for a long time, being a woman depends very much on whether you are educated or not, whether you have a job, whether you live in an urban or a rural area. At the same time, there are constitutional guarantees of equality and freedom, and yet the enjoyment of rights vary among people. So relative to a lot of countries, especially in the West African sub-region, life is relatively okay. Ghana comes out among the top 10 on several indicators for most of Africa, but perhaps the bar is low, and just because you're among the top 10, if everybody is not performing very well, then being among the top 10 is not
still much progress.
Still much progress. So I would say it's very much a work in progress. You know, there's still a lot to be done, but there are several achievements. Actually, it's interesting. When I was flying out to the U.S. on Saturday, there was a parliamentary delegation from Ghana which was going to Canada for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association meetings. And I talked to them. So there were 5 of them, and there were 3 men and 2 women, which doesn't mean that for every 5 people in Parliament, there are 2 women. But it seemed a fairly balanced
for a delegation.
Team. Yes, for the delegation, you know. So you could call that progress until you remember that we have a parliament of 275 members, and only 37 are women. Perhaps not too much unlike the U.S. Congress. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. How do you define women's empowerment? What does it mean to be empowered, and what factors create empowerment in women's lives?
Women's empowerment is it's a composite. It's not one thing. We're talking about favorable political and social environments. We're talking about laws and policies. We're talking about opportunities. This evening I'll be giving a talk on women's empowerment, and I have described it as a journey, not a destination. You don't arrive and say, right,
you are empowered.
Now I'm empowered and I can fold my arms and, live happily ever after. Lots of zigzags. It's not linear, and it's not something that you bestow on somebody. It's not a gift. It has to be struggled for. And I think that, it's become what we call a buzzword. Everybody is trying to empower somebody. The World Bank is empowering women with opportunities, etc. But it's more than the material resources. It's also about changes in consciousness, critical consciousness, and it's questioning societal structures and attitudes. And as I have said, you win some, you lose some. Even some of what you win can be in danger of being taken away from you. So it's exciting. It's a journey. It's yeah.
Great. Well, Takyiwaa, a large part of your activism has been working directly with the Ghanaian government to change the country's laws regarding women's rights. And you've alluded to a few so far, but what is the legal landscape like in Ghana regarding women in government or land rights, labor rights, things like that?
Thank you. Well, I would say it's a work in progress. In 2006, we passed domestic violence legislation in Ghana after a long struggle. In fact, at the time, we had a minister for women and children's affairs who was opposed to the law. So she was one of our greatest barriers. She accused us of trying to destabilize families instead of the violence in families that really hurt people and destabilize them, But we worked very hard and we managed to pass the legislation. But passing legislation is only one thing. Implementing, getting the law to work is much harder. And so and especially in a country where there are never enough resources, where the police themselves have attitudes that are not necessarily supportive. So we've worked hard with the police. We've got a domestic violence victim support unit within the police service. And women's rights organizations have worked very hard with the police. People have volunteered services to be counselors, etc. And we have a domestic violence coalition which has been tracking the implementation of the law to make sure that what the law says, like the budgetary allocations, etc.
It's actually happening.
And so there is better consciousness. People know that they have a right. It doesn't mean that they always choose to use it, but it's there. On land, Ghana, like many African countries, have a multiplicity of legal systems. So a lot of land holdings are held under customary law. And right now there is a land bill in Parliament which we are monitoring and tracking. And there are provisions about non-discrimination, but we think that this is not enough. That, if you have a provision about non-discrimination, but you still keep the customary land structures, which themselves can be discriminatory, it's a problem. But at least we have engaged with the parliamentary committee, we've submitted memoranda, and we're tracking actively the passage of the law. On labor rights, again, constitutionally, men and women earn the same amount for work of equal value, but you do find that this applies to people who work in the formal sector, both public and private. At the same time, the majority of employed people work in the informal sector or in agriculture, and a lot of women work as unpaid family workers. In the informal sector, the regulations do not really apply, so they don't have decent work. They're not entitled to paid holidays or maternity leave or pensions, etc. So the formal statements are one thing, but for laws to work, they need to be lived, they need to be experienced by the people for whom it is supposed to work, and their rights need to be recognized and respected.
Yeah, and Ghana's not quite there yet.
No, I mean, you will see the constitutional guarantees, etc., but because of the kind of dual or plural legal systems, it is possible to operate in that system, which is also legal, so it does create. So it's also a process of engaging with those who are the custodians, the guardians of those systems, to see that human rights apply to everybody and they are indivisible, etc. And then, of course, politically, I mean, Ghana is in West Africa, and West Africa, it's an interesting region. It's a very dynamic sub-region, but when it comes to political rights, compared to Eastern and Southern Africa, Eastern and Southern African countries have made more progress because they have quota systems for women, and with the exception of Senegal, which has a gender parity law, most West African countries don't, and so women's formal political representation is low. I already told you about Ghana, where there are 37 people in our parliament compared to women in our parliament compared to 275, and that's largely the scene around West Africa.
All of us, yeah.
So we do have an affirmative action law that we are also really pushing to have passed, so that quota systems can be established for women in politics and decision making until we achieve a level playing field.
Okay, great. One topic that is especially important to you, Takyiwaa, is increasing higher education opportunities for women. Can you talk to us about how your own life experiences have influenced your passion for activism and why higher education is so important?
Well, I've spent most of my adult life in higher education. I went to a girls' school, an all-girls school, which really taught us excellence, and you can find the products of my school everywhere in Ghana. We've had 2 female chief justices in Ghana. The current one is a female, and the one before her was also female, and both of them went to Wesley Girls. Okay, and I know that what has made the difference is the opportunities they had through education to, first of all, learn in an environment that taught them that they were good as, if not better, than any man. And also that they had the opportunity to study. And so I am passionate about education, and especially higher education. And I think that in countries such as Ghana, higher education systems are crucial. In many of our countries, higher education systems were set up just around the time when the struggle for independence began, to first create a core of locally trained African personnel who could take over the reins of government. And it used to be very restrictive, but increasingly the opportunities have expanded. And beyond just providing well-trained human resources. I think that knowledge and knowledge production globally has become very important, and it is higher education and research systems that create that kind of advantage. And I believe that Africa should also aim to excel in that. And within those systems, women should also be found. It's a matter of justice, it's a matter of equality. They are the majority in many countries. So unless you have a representative system, you're not really going to be able to change much. And women have been increasing, especially as students, but not so much as faculty members and researchers. More so in the humanities and social sciences, but not so much in science, engineering, technology, and math, But I do believe that Africa needs its scholars, it needs its higher education systems, and that women should be well represented within those systems. They have the ability, they have the passion, and if given the opportunities, I believe that they can excel as much as men can.
And this ties back into empowerment as well, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, education is necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's a necessary condition for women's empowerment.
Great. Takyiwaa, thank you so much for coming in to share your experiences with us.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's been my pleasure.
That's all for this edition of Cyber Focus. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at CIBER, that's CIBER, cyber, at indiana.edu.